Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves. There is a time on the birthing table that feels like dying. The body opens and expands to 10 centimeters. The contractions come less than a minute apart, and there's no time to rest between them. The medical term, transition. I suppose because drowning in a sea of pain is just a little too precise. The midwife tells you to breathe, and then, but in my moment of transition, I was not breathing and I was not pushing. My husband's hand was on my sacrum to keep my body from flying apart into 1,000 pieces. My mother's hand was on my head, whispering in my ear, "You are brave. You are brave." The midwife said she could see the head, but all I could feel was a ring of fire. And I turned to my mother and I said, "I can't," but she was already whispering a sick prayer in my ear. Tati vana lagi pad brahm shanai jogit hamare ram ka dukh lage na pai. The hot winds cannot touch you. You are shielded by love. And as she was reciting, I suddenly saw my grandmother standing behind my mother, and her mother behind her, and her mother behind her, a long line of women who had birthed me. I pushed. My son was born. And I turned to my mother, and she was already preparing to feed me, feeding her baby as I was feeding mine. And for the first time, I knew what revolutionary love looks like. In the last 100 days, many of us have had a hard time breathing. Since the inauguration of this president, we have faced an onslaught of executive orders, sometimes minutes apart, that have inflicted pain on our communities. Executive orders and policies that threaten to build a wall along our southern border, punish sanctuary cities, construct pipelines on indigenous land, overturn healthcare, voting rights, net neutrality, enact bans on Muslims, on immigrants, and policies designed to criminalize Muslims and communities like ours. Anytime the government criminalizes a people, anytime the government targets a particular people through word and policy, it emboldens people to act on the bias within them, and we see hate crimes go up. And so it's no surprise through this election season and since this inauguration that hate crimes are at an all-time high. Anti-Muslim hate groups have tripled, and our communities feel like we're in a perpetual state of siege. I just flew here from Kansas City, where Srinivas Kuchibhotla was the first person killed in hate since the inauguration by a man who yelled, "Get out of my country," before he pulled the trigger. His widow, Sunaina, my age, just returned from India a few days ago, where she cremated her husband's body. She walks into her empty home, but she could still feel Shrinu's voice in her ear, whispering, "You are brave, Sunaina, you are brave." Her grief comes down in a torrent of tears. And I know that hate sears flesh, hate breaks bones, but hate also poisons the air that we breathe. And so communities like ours feel like they have been dying, feel like they have been drowning since this inauguration. We have had a hard time breathing. And yet, on the day after the inauguration, I bundled up my son, and took him into the streets of downtown Los Angeles where we were marching. How many of you were marching? Millions of us were marching on city streets across this country and around the world in the largest protest that the United States has ever seen, organized by women of color. And thousands of us since then have shown up. We have rallied at the airports. We have called Congress. We have organized our neighborhoods. We have been at the vigils. We have not given up every day. It feels relentless, and yet we are fighting off fatigue because we know that a time of political and moral crisis such as this requires us to do something to keep our bodies from flying apart into 1,000 pieces. Sunaina turned to me before I left her and said to me, "Not one more Shrinu, not one more Sunaina." Inside of grief and inside of fatigue, she was resolved to fight. We share her resolve to fight. That's why we're here. But here's the truth. We fought the first Muslim ban. We are fighting the second Muslim ban. We fought to protect healthcare. We have already prepared for the next policy battle. In Congress, in the courts, and in the streets, we are fighting. We are sharing that resolve. But it has not yet been 100 days. And here's the truth. No number of policy wins will solve the conditions that gave rise to this presidency. No number of policy wins will stop the threat of raids, deportations, detentions, border walls, and pipelines that threatened our communities before this presidency. No number of policy wins will solve the conditions that gave rise to the anxiety, the fear, the hate, the vitriol, and the white nationalism that has captured segments of this population and our institutions of power. No, because this is not a fight between left and right. The fight we are fighting today, our moral resistance, it is a fight between democracy and authoritarianism. We are fighting for our lives. We need these policy wins. We need to fight these battles, but in order to solve the conditions that gave rise to what the Southern Poverty Law Center calls the era of enormous rage, we need a new way of seeing one another, not as foreigners or strangers or even neighbors, but as brothers and sisters whose destinies are bound up together. We need a new way of engaging with people, those who disagree with us, even those who hurt us, because for every terrorist or white nationalist or demagogue we take down from office, there will be more to take their place if we don't solve the conditions that gave rise to the violence within them, if we don't change the institutions of power that allow them to hurt us. And we need to build our movement for social justice in a way that does not mirror the rage and the hate and the vitriol that we are resisting. And that's why, my brothers and sisters, I believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times. I believe we need a new public ethic in America. And I'm here because love has called me here. Love. I want to take a moment and acknowledge that if you cringe at the word love, it's okay. I have too. I'm a lawyer. I was trained to cringe at the word love. I was trained to be suspicious of this word love, because in our country today, love has been captured by Hallmark cards and pop songs and chick flicks. Love has been presented to us as a private emotion, as a state of bliss that one falls into if we're lucky. Love is sentimental. Love is too sentimental, too anemic, too fickle to be a political force. If we look back through history, any social movement that has created lasting change, from Gandhi to King to Mandela to Chavez, they knew that love was a wellspring that gave people courage they did not know they had. And if we go further back into our faith and wisdom traditions, we hear the call of love coursing down through the centuries. The first time I heard the call to love was when I was a little girl listening to the stories my grandfather would tell me about the Sikh faith. The story goes, my favorite story, the origin story. 500 years ago, in what is now India and Pakistan, there was a man named Nanak, so distraught by the violence around him, by his time of political and moral crisis, that he retreated. He disappeared by the river for 3 days. People thought him a dead man. People thought him a drowned man. But on the 3rd day he emerged. He was birthed anew. I see no stranger, he said. I see no enemy. He began singing a song of oneness, Ik Onkar, the heart of the Sikh faith. And he taught that within each of us is a voice that lives and struggles and wants and dies only for itself. We know this voice. It is the voice of fear. Home, it's called. Home, the I that names itself as separate from others, the I that divides us from them. If we quiet this voice, Guru Nanak taught, if we quiet this voice through music and song and meditation and prayer and poetry, then something marvelous happens. We are in love. And when we are in love, we see with new eyes. I see no stranger. I see no enemy. That means that just as we look upon the faces of our partners and our children, we are called to look upon the faces of people who do not look like us and say, sister, brother, I see you. I choose to love you, and therefore I will fight for you. The followers of Guru Nanak became known as Sikhs, S-I-K-H, seekers of truth. And we began to wear long articles of faith, including long uncut hair, which men and some women wrap in turbans. These articles of faith are meant to be read as our commitment to justice and love. How ironic that they now mark us for terrorism in this country. Guru Nanak said, if you want to play the game of love with me, come forth with your head on your hand. You see, the path of love is not safe. The path of love is not easy. And so Sikhs, we became warrior people. We took up sword and shield to fight the injustices of our time, the empire of our day. The first woman warrior, her name was Mai Bhago. In the year 1705, there were 40 soldiers who abandoned the fight in a great battle. They returned to their village, and this village woman, she turned to them and she said, you will not abandon the fire. You will return to the flames. And I will lead you. Mai Bhago, she mounted a horse. She donned a turban. She took a sword in her hand, and with fire in her eyes, she led them where no one else would. She became the one she was waiting for. Love, the kind of love my faith taught me, the kind of love my mother showed me, requires us to face the fires of this life and push into them, to face the fires of this world with a warrior's heart and a saint's eyes and go through them in order to birth forth new possibilities. Revolutionary love. Revolutionary love is not a passing feeling. It is an orientation to the world, a commitment to ask of others, who are you? What is at stake for you? What is your role in my flourishing? What is my role in your flourishing? Revolutionary love calls us to take up sword and shield in times of crisis. What is your sword? Is it your law degree? Is it your film camera? Is it your author's pen? Is it your Twitter feed? What is your sword? How will you fight? How will you walk into the flames where communities in harm's way need us to show up right now as we speak? The path of love is long and hard. I know this because when those fires first burned bright before my eyes, I was only 20 years old. I became an activist in the aftermath of the first hate murder after September 11th, Balbir Singh Sodhi murdered in the first hate crime, the first of dozens of people killed in hate crimes after 9/11, a man I called uncle. That's when my film camera became my sword, my law degree became my shield, and traveling across the country after 9/11, I soon realized that the liberation of my people was bound up in the liberation of others. And so, for the last 15 years, I have fought in the fire. At the sites of mass shootings, sometimes when the blood was still fresh on the ground, on the shores of Guantanamo, inside of America's supermax prisons, and with every film, with every lawsuit, with every public education campaign, I thought we were making the nation safer for the next generation. And then my son was born. And the moment I held him in my hands, that moment of exquisite joy was followed by profound heartache. Because at the same time I was holding him in my hands, the same hour, there were people marching in city streets across America protesting the killings of young, unarmed Black sons and daughters, holding their hands high above their heads, chanting, "I can't breathe." Because when my son was only 8 weeks old, I had to bundle him up and take him to his first candlelight vigil, mourning the lives of 3 college students, all Muslim, all shot in the head by a man who despised religion. And I thought of my son their age one day, and I couldn't breathe. Because on my son's first Christmas Eve, I put out the milk and cookies as he watched and told him he couldn't eat them. They were for Santa Claus. And then when he went to sleep, I then proceeded to eat the cookies and drink the milk. I wanted him to wake up in the morning and see them gone. I wanted him to believe in a world that was magical. But the very next day, the day after Christmas, another sick man was beaten almost to death in my hometown where my family has lived more than a century. His collarbone broken to the words, "Why are you here?" And as his collarbone broke, the spell was broken too. I realize I'm raising a brown boy in America, a brown boy who may someday wear a turban as part of his faith. I'm raising him in a country more dangerous than the one that I was given since this election season, since this inauguration. There will be moments when his body is seen as foreign and suspect, just as Black bodies are still seen as criminal. Brown bodies still seen as illegal, trans bodies still seen as immoral, the bodies of women and girls seen as property, indigenous bodies seen as savage. And when we see these bodies as things, when we refuse to see these bodies as brothers and sisters, as sons and daughters, and it becomes easier to stand back and watch policies that incarcerate them, demonize them, rape them, detain them, deport them, kill them. I cannot shield my son from these fires. That was never my job. We cannot protect our children from these fires. That's not our task right now. Revolutionary love, the kind my mother showed me, she pointed me toward that ring of fire. She said, "Breathe and push. You are brave. Life lies on the other side of these flames." That's what faith looks like right now. After Amrik Singh's beating, I left my job at Stanford Law School. I found myself in a state of crisis. I wanted to find a way to think about how to solve the conditions that gave rise to the moment that we're in. I wanted to find a place to think about the call of revolutionary love, not just as a call, but as a path that each of us can walk. How can we take this ethic and this ethic that has only been framed to us in religious terms, even in Christian terms? The last time that love was central in American public discourse was during the Civil Rights era, when faith leaders like Dr. King presented love as a form of social justice. We need to draw upon that heritage now, but not in the same way. This is a new generation. This is a new political moment, more diverse, more intersectional, more multicultural, racial, religious than ever before. We need love as a secular ethic. We need to define love as a moral imperative. We need to define love in such a way that we draw from all of our various faith and wisdom traditions, Christian, Sikh, Muslim, but also art, history, and literature too, so that humanists and secularists find themselves at home walking the path of love. Where could I go to examine a question such as this? Middle Church. One year ago, my big sister, the Reverend Jackie Lewis, brought me to Middle as a scholar in residence, and it was here that we built a team of 15 fellows of revolutionary love, fellows who are sitting here today. Together, we launched the Revolutionary Love Project that found its home at USC, and ever since then, ever since we launched our project last September, we have been championing the ethic of love in our movement for social justice. And that's why I'm standing with Jackie Lewis today. That's why I'm with Middle Church today. That's why we are all gathered here today to ask this question together. What is the role of love in our movement for social justice in a time such as this? Our thesis is that it takes three kinds of love for love to be revolutionary. Revolutionary love for others. What does it look like to look upon the faces of those who do not look like us and say, sister and brother? What does it look like right now to turn our love into action, to stand up for all the communities that lie in harm's way right now as we speak? How do we answer that call to love? What are the tools? What are the tactics? We'll be exploring that together in the next 3 days. Revolutionary love for opponents. What does it mean to extend the same ethic of love to those who disagree with us or those who hurt us? We refuse to hate them because we refuse to be like them. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. Because once we are free from hate, we're able to listen to their stories too. Not for their veracity. We listen to their stories to understand the cultural forces and the institutions of power that gave rise to the aggression within them. And then we know how to fight in a way that liberates them too. How do we do that? That's what we will be exploring together in the next 3 days. And revolutionary love for ourselves. Now, this is the truth. Gandhi and King and all those great social justice leaders who came before us, they talked about how to love others. They talked about how to love our opponents, but they didn't talk much about how to love ourselves. This is a womanist intervention. This is Bell Hooks. This is Audre Lorde, who says caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is a form of political warfare. We know that too often women and women of color have not only bore the brunt of oppression, but struggles against oppression. Too often movements for liberation are fought on our backs and over our dead bodies. Too often our suffering is mistaken for service, but no more. It is time for us to learn how to embody the wellness, the dignity, the care that we want for the rest of the world in our lives, in our homes, in our own bodies. And that is why joy is an act of moral resistance. Our thesis is that it takes all three forms of love for love to be revolutionary, because if you love only yourself and not others or opponents, well, that's just escapism. That's narcissism. It's tempting, but that's what it is. If we love just our opponents and not others and ourselves, well, that's self-loathing. If we love others, but not our opponents or ourselves, that's ineffective. This is where our movement is right now. We are showing up for each other. We are building solidarity as the foundation for our movement, but notice that we are already feeling the fatigue 100 days in, and we're already burning out 100 days in. If we want to sustain the movement we are building, we cannot run on fumes. We need to ground our action in love that is deep, love that includes opponents, love that includes ourselves. And so, as we gather in this moment of darkness, I want to ask you a question that I have been asking myself since New Year's Eve. What if? What if this is not the darkness of the tomb? What if this is the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead? What if our America is a country that is still waiting to be born? What if all of our ancestors are standing behind us right now? All of our ancestors who survived genocide and occupation, slavery and Jim Crow, political detention and sexual violence, what if they're all standing behind us right now, whispering in our ear, "You are brave. You are brave." What if this moment is our nation's great transition? What does the midwife ask us to do? And then, because if we don't push, we will die. If we don't push, our nation will die. And let me tell you, labored breathing is a special kind of breathing. We don't give birth alone, and we don't go into battle alone. We need one another. That's why we are here. We are taking the hands of our brothers and sisters to breathe together. Breathe together. Because if we breathe together, we will be able to push together. And if we push together, we might, with our love, our revolutionary love, birth a nation that is waiting to be born. Thank you so much. Bye, Kiriji Kakasa. Bye, Kiriji Kakasa.